My mother stood in the living room, holding the wedding invitation I'd spent 3 months designing. "We're not paying for this circus," she said, calm, final, and sharp enough to split the air. I still remember the way she said circus, as if my love was some cheap performance. Dad stayed silent. My younger brother laughed. "Guess you should thank her, Claire. At least now you won't get dumped at the altar." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just said one word. "Okay." And then I walked out of that house. The house I once thought was safe. 3 weeks later, when their entire world began to collapse, they finally learned what that word really meant. This isn't a story about a canceled wedding. It's about how I turned silence into a weapon, and how a daughter they underestimated tore down the empire her mother built, one secret at a time. It had been nearly 2 years since I last stepped inside my mother's house. But when she said we needed to talk about the wedding like adults, I agreed. Maybe deep down I still believed there was a version of her that could be reasoned with. The house was exactly as I remembered. White walls, pale blue curtains, and the faint scent of lavender drifting through every hallway. Except it wasn't really lavender. It was control disguised as comfort. In that house, nothing was ever real. Not even the air. My mother, Margaret Lowell, was the kind of woman the whole town of Burlington admired. A high school teacher with perfect posture and a gentle smile at every church event. But everyone who'd ever been her student knew the truth. Don't disappoint Mrs. Lowell. My father, Douglas, was the shadow behind her, quiet, agreeable. And me, Claire, the only child who spent her life trying to make herself small enough to fit inside my mother's expectations. When I was little, she taught me embroidery. "You must learn patience," she said. "A girl doesn't need to be too clever, just steady." I was steady, patient, obedient. I waited 28 years for her approval, for permission to live. Then I met Eli. We met at a cafe by Lake Champlain. He was a civil engineer who smiled with his whole face and listened before he spoke. When he proposed to me under the falling snow that winter, I thought maybe, just maybe, I was finally free. But my mother didn't see freedom. She saw rebellion. "He's not on your level," she told me. "No ambition, no future, no class." Dad said nothing, his silence signing off on her cruelty like always. It wasn't anger that hurt. It was the quiet complicity. When I said I wanted to pay for my own wedding, she laughed. "Don't be foolish, Claire. Family means support." Now I know what she really meant. Family means control. She took over everything. The flowers, the music, the guest list. I wanted a small ceremony. She wanted an event this town won't forget. I'd never beaten her at anything, not because I couldn't, but because she made me believe that leaving her would mean losing myself. Still, something inside me had started to shift. Maybe it was the way Eli painted over the old walls of our apartment, smiling even when the paint ran. Maybe it was the moment I saw myself in the mirror wearing the dress I had chosen. Or maybe it was the quiet realization that my entire life had been written in my mother's chalk, and I'd been too afraid to erase it. So that afternoon, when she said, "We're not paying for this circus," I didn't break. I didn't beg. I just said, "Okay," and for the first time, okay didn't mean surrender. It meant enough. Rain began to fall as I drove away. In Vermont, autumn rain has this way of feeling permanent, cold, heavy, like a curtain closing on something that will never reopen. Eli called 3 times. I didn't pick up. How was I supposed to explain that my mother had just canceled my wedding? Erased it, like a mistake on her to-do list. Our apartment on College Street felt like a different planet. Everything was still there. The white dress covered in muslin, the box of invitations, the yellow ribbons we'd planned to hang that morning. Everything frozen mid-moment. I sat on the floor, staring at the printed words, "Claire and Eli, November 3rd. That date would still come, even if no one showed up. My mother had always believed happiness should be engineered. Love to her wasn't an emotion. It was a social strategy. When I was a child and dared to argue, she'd say, "You're ungrateful. I only want what's best for you." But best, in her language, meant obedient. That night, I folded each invitation, placed them carefully into a cardboard box, and sealed it shut. Not out of anger. I didn't have the energy for that. It was numbness. Eli showed up later, soaked from the rain. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just held me. and for a few moments, the world stopped shaking. When he left, I wandered to my old desk drawer and found an old sketchbook buried at the bottom, one I thought Mom had thrown away years ago. The pages were bent and smudged, filled with drawings of dresses and fabrics I once loved. I traced a line with my finger. It wasn't just a drawing. It was the ghost of who I used to be. I opened the sketchbook and began to draw again. Each pencil stroke was like a breath of defiance. It was the first time in years I'd created something for myself. Outside, the rain kept falling. And for once, I didn't try to stop it. 3 days later, I went back to work at a small accounting firm near College Street. People say numbers are cold, but to me they've always felt like the only truth left. That morning, an email arrived from the bank. Update on linked account. Owner, Margaret Lowell. I froze. I didn't remember linking any account with her. When I opened the attachment, my breath caught. Every dollar Eli and I had saved for the wedding had been transferred to something called the Lowell Family Maintenance Fund. Each transaction bore my digital signature. I stared at the screen, hollow. It wasn't just money she'd taken. It was my name. My existence I called the bank. The woman on the line said gently, "Your e-signature matches your sample by 98%. To dispute it, you'll need legal representation. Legal representation." I almost laughed. My mother had always said, "Never take family to court, people will talk." But at that moment, I didn't care who talked. I just wanted the truth seen. That afternoon, I drove to see Diane Grant, a retired lawyer who'd once worked with my firm. She welcomed me into her cabin, warm coffee, stacks of files, quiet strength. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp. She opened her laptop and said, "Show me the statements." Her eyes moved calmly over each line until she stopped. "This isn't just a forged signature," she said. "It's embezzlement. And you can press charges." I looked out the window. Snow had begun to fall, light, soft, but endless. I whispered, "I can't take my own mother to court." Diane said, "She's already taken you there, Claire. You just didn't notice." That night, I went through every file my mother had ever helped manage. Each spreadsheet hid a small withdrawal, neatly labeled, recurring for years. All of it traced back to one place, the Lowell Heritage Fund. Money that belonged to my late grandfather. Money my mother swore was gone years ago. She hadn't just canceled a wedding. She'd rewritten my life to hide her own theft. Eli called again. "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure," I said. "But I think I'm finally starting to understand. I hadn't planned on going back there. But some storms you can't outrun." The house looked smaller than I remembered. When I knocked, she opened the door in her gray cardigan, her hair pinned up the same way she wore it to every PTA meeting. "Claire," she said softly, "you should have called first." Inside, everything smelled like lavender and power. Dad sat on the couch pretending to read. The clock ticked between us like a metronome for our silence. "Why did you do it?" I asked. She poured tea, ignoring me. "If you mean the wedding," she said, "I only did what was necessary. You were making a mistake. By forging my name?" Her hand paused midair just a second. Then she said, "You don't understand. I was protecting our family's reputation." I laughed, sharp, dry. "Which family, Mom? The one where no one's allowed to breathe?" "Watch your tone." "I've been watching it for 28 years. Dad folded the newspaper, voice trembling. "Let's not do this." I turned to him. "Did you know she took Grandpa's money?" He looked down, silent again. That silence. It cut deeper than her lies. I placed an envelope on the table. Bank records, contracts, and the forged signature. "Is this your idea of honor?" She stared at the papers, lips tightening. "People will laugh at you, Claire. You'll ruin yourself." "Then let them laugh," I said. "At least they'll know who I really am." She stood up, eyes glinting cold. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You're my blood." I met her gaze, calm. "I am your blood. That's why I know what I'm capable of." And then I walked out, into the pouring rain, into the beginning of something new. Winter settled deep in Vermont. The world turned white, quiet, and slow. Each morning I brewed coffee and sat by the window watching the maple trees shiver in the wind. Some days I didn't speak at all. Diane sent over a stack of documents, 30 pages of proof, cold and undeniable. I read them all page by page. This wasn't family drama anymore. It was a case file, and the defendant was my mother. Eli came by with a paper bag. "Apple pie," he said. "You haven't been eating," I smiled weakly. "You still remember." He glanced around my apartment, now littered with fabric and sketches. "Are you designing again?" "No," I said. "I'm just seeing who I might have been." He squeezed my hand. No words, just warmth. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at the wedding photos we'd never taken. Empty chairs, unlit candles, the archway that never saw us. Strangely, I didn't hurt anymore. It felt like looking at someone else's life, a life I'd finally stepped out of. The next morning, I met Diane to sign the papers. She looked at me over her silver-rimmed glasses. "Are you afraid?" "No," I said. "Just sad." "Good," she replied. "It means you still have a heart." I signed my name, shaky but real. It was the first time my signature belonged entirely to me. That night, I drew again, not wedding gowns, but long gray coats and flowing scarves that looked like the Vermont sky before snow. Underneath, I wrote, "Every wound is where the light gets in," and for the first time in my life, my hand didn't tremble. The day of the hearing, the sky hung low and colorless. I stood outside the courthouse, holding Diane's file tight against my chest. Inside, the air smelled like old wood and justice. My parents sat across the aisle. Mom looked composed, almost regal. Dad looked tired, smaller than I remembered. I didn't feel anger, just a quiet grief. Diane began. "This isn't just a financial case. Your Honor, it's a case about identity, about a woman's right to her own life. Every document, every forged signature, every dollar misused appeared on the screen. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was barely steady. I only wanted to protect my daughter from a mistake. I looked at her and said, 'No, Mom. You wanted to protect your control.' The mistake was thinking I'd always stay silent." When the verdict came, guilty of fraud and misappropriation, I didn't celebrate. I simply breathed. For the first time, freely. Outside, snow was melting on the courthouse steps. Eli waited with 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. "It's over?" "Yeah," I said. "It's over." We sat by the lake where he'd proposed. The air was cold but soft, the sky clearing into the palest blue. "I don't know what comes next," I whispered. He smiled. "That's the best part. It's yours now." That evening, I went home and worked on my first clothing line. I called it Linen Sky. No wedding dresses, just pieces that felt like freedom. A text came in from Mom. "I'm sorry." I read it, then set the phone face down. Not because I couldn't forgive her, but because I no longer needed her apology to exist. I opened the window. The cold air rushed in, smelling faintly of thawing snow. My gray dress on the mannequin swayed gently in the wind. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I had stopped being afraid.